Mr. DeSalvo, it's a pleasure to see you.
Likewise.
Martin, does he make you call him Mr. DeSalvo as well, or no?
Only on board meetings.
Oh,
We're waiting for Chris and Vanessa. Chris is going to be a couple of minutes late, but he should be on very shortly. The chat's still on.
Yes, and that was just going to be a discussion point at the end of the meeting of retaining that or removing that.
Oh, I thought we had agreed beforehand to remove it.
I think just based on our discussion, Al, it was just, I think what I had made the recommendation of is just bring that up in a public forum just to make sure that's noted somewhere before it's switched, just so that there's notice that way. And then we can, after that, if that's what the board decides, then we can update agendas going forward just to note that the chat feature will be disabled.
Now, Glenessa will be on shortly. She was busy. She said time just got away from her.
Gotcha. Thanks for the update.
Hi, Glenessa.
Hello, sorry about that.
No worries.
You're just waiting for Chris. He had a little delay. He should be on shortly.
Okay.
One thing just to the board quickly, the representative for the application at 1048 Central Avenue has to attend 2 other board meetings this evening, and was wondering if we could shift their position in the agenda since they're anticipating they'll be presenting around 6:30 to the first board. So I was wondering if there was flexibility to shift their position in the public meeting agenda to being the first public meeting agenda item.
I think that would be okay. It's not going to be a long item. It's for concept review, is that correct?
It is a public meeting. They'll be coming back for a public hearing at a future meeting. So it's not the last appearance. So it's just the first appearance, but there are other steps in the process that they would need to take before the board could act on the application.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we should get going. Chris said 5 minutes, but it's been 10. And I think we don't want to keep everybody for longer than they have to be. So I'll begin. Are we ready?
All set.
Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Good evening, everyone. This is a combination workshop and planning board official meeting for the city of Albany. And we have with us 4 of our 5 planning board members, and our 5th one will be along soon. So far is Martin Hull, Roman Kuchera, Glenisa Gayard, and I'm Al DeSalvo, the chairman. We also have with us planning department staff, Zach Powell, and our corporation counsel attorney, Martha Mahoney. The workshop is for discussion among the planning board members and the planning staff to view new projects or projects that have been underway but not yet ready to be presented in an official meeting, or ones that we have seen in an official meeting but needed clarification or other adjustments. There's no public input at the workshop. Public input would come at planning board meetings, and the workshop items generally appear at the planning board meetings in the next round. So we have, for the workshop, 1 item on the agenda, and that's 244 State Street, which is also known as 90 South Swan. And the board members may remember that we have reviewed this proposed project a number of times in 2020, but the project was delayed because of the COVID problems, and the applicant was not able to reapply after the automatic 1 year holdover that we allow for projects to begin after approval. So the board has approved this project, and there's a couple of minor changes that Zach will go into.
Great, thanks, Al. So I'll just do a similar recap to what Al provided. Again, here's the location for the building. It's at the corner of State and South Swan Street. It's located in a mixed-use community urban zoning district, and it's bounded by 3 other zoning districts: RM, which is residential multi-unit, mixed-use neighborhood edge, MUNE, and MUCI, which is mixed-use campus institutional, and is across the street, and is also bounded by the RT, or townhouse zoning district as well. So just as Al had mentioned, the applicant had submitted a very similar application to the planning board in 2020 that was approved on September 29th. With an expiration date of September 29th of 2021. The applicant had started the process for reviewing building permits, but had not received building permit approval by that date and did not submit an extension request to the chief planning official, who is the planning director, Brad Glass, by that point. So essentially that approval expired at that point. So that's why it's coming back to the planning board for review. Here's just a quick table similar to the table that was prepared for the presentation on 237 Western Avenue. As you can see, there's very little change in what was previously approved and what the current proposal is, other than a slight decrease by about 50 square feet in the size of the proposed cafe that's on the ground floor. I'll go through the floor plan and the site plan really quickly, just as a reminder of what's being proposed. For the site plan, the applicant's required to provide landscaping with new trees, and they're also required to provide some planters as street furniture. The trees are noted here, and the planters are noted with these green boxes that are outlined in brown as well. For the floor plan, and Chris, we're just on 244 State Street, just to get you up to speed. So looking at the floor plan for the ground floor plan for 244 State Street, the cafe is in the bottom left, highlighted in blue. And then the required recreational space for the building is located on the ground floor on the right, highlighted in purple, which includes a combination of a rec room, a gym, and a shared working space. Something that came up during the previous review was concern from neighboring residents about trash storage. So as you'll see on the ground floor plan and on the next set of floor plans, which encompasses the 2nd through 4th floor plans, there are trash storage rooms on each floor as well, to help ensure that trash is stored interior to the building. And then, as what came up with the last review, a building manager will live on site that can handle taking out the trash on the appropriate trash day to make sure that they're brought promptly back in to the building after the trash has been collected. For the 2nd through 4th floor plans, these are all residential units. There's a total of 60 units for the building. As a result, the applicant has to submit an affordable housing compliance plan to provide at least 3 dwelling units for the project, which are noted right now in gray, as you can see over here. And then again, the trash storage area, which is highlighted in that darker blue next to the stairwell. Another reminder, there's no parking required for this project since it's a change of use that does not increase the required amount of parking by over 50%. The applicant has expressed a willingness to establish an agreement with One Commerce Plaza to allow for garage parking in the evening for residents. In all of the units, they include washers and dryers. And as I mentioned when I was discussing the ground floor plan, they have provided the required 10% of recreational space. This project is currently being reviewed by city departments, and the application will be sent to the Albany County Planning Board just to determine if a second review is necessary, even though that the change in the application is relatively minor. And finally, this is classified as a type 2 action under seeker since it's a reuse of an existing structure. Any questions on this application?
No, I would just remind the board that the reason that we are seeing this again and again emphasize the only real change is 50 feet smaller restaurant. And the only reason we're going to have to review this application at the next meeting is because the 1 year period of approval expired, and the applicant did not resubmit the plan in time for an extension. So we would need to act on it at the next planning board meeting.
Is the building currently occupied, or is it empty?
I believe it's vacant since they were prepping for the building permit process. If the applicant wants to provide that answer in the chat, that's great. If not, I can follow up after the meeting. The applicant just said it's empty.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay, if not, we'll move on. Okay. The public meeting will now begin, and I will explain the rules of procedure for the public meetings. In public meetings, presentations first will be given by the applicant. It'll be either a 10-minute presentation, or if we have reviewed a project already and this is the second or third time around, the applicant will be given 6 minutes. The board will then have questions to the applicant, after which there would be public comment. The public comment will be for 3 minutes, and then after that, the planning staff will make its presentation and recommendations. Following that, the applicant can either clarify or clear up some factual issues that may occur. The public comment, I would emphasize, is not only important to us, but most important is that we urge that all the people who want to make comments also provide it in writing, so that we have a good record. It will also gives you an opportunity to expound more on what you see of concern or why you're in favor of a project. It gives you the opportunity to be much more complete. So with that, oh, and I will also mention that when it comes time for public comment, and also for when the applicant presents, Zach will be able to time you, and he will explain that when that time comes. So we have been asked to quickly move up an initial project that we haven't seen before, which is right now on the concept review. And that is 1048 Central Avenue. The applicant is Ryan Blatt. And this is for a conditional permit review and a major development plan review. And the reason is that there's a change of use of the property from an indoor recreation area facility to a restaurant. This project is right next to the city line, just about, and is currently a billiard parlor. Okay, is the applicant available?
Dan, I elevated
the
you.
applicant.
Oh.
Hi, Daniel Hertzberg, Hertzberg and Hertzberg, are representing 1048 Central ALB LLC. The project occupies the building currently occupied by Golden Q. The use is somewhat different than what we've seen before, although it's a restaurant use. It's actually made up of a number of prep kitchens for people that are preparing stuff strictly for takeout. The building is shown on the project location, and we're in an MU-NC zone, and we butt up to an R1M zone at the rear. The next slide shows well, it's a small description. The parking in front stays exactly the way it is now. The parking in the rear stays exactly the way it is now. And the building limitations are exactly as are now. There's no addition to the building. We'll be adding a bike rack at the front and redoing the entrance door. So, but that is the major changes made to the building. And in addition to the prep kitchens, there are a small dry good area that has the capability of storing some material that can be sold. Again, somebody comes in, picks up a meal, they can pick up a bottle of soda, pick up plates, can pick up things that are available there to go with their meal. These prep kitchens will be people that are preparing all sorts of different food for takeout. Some might concentrate on breakfast, some on snacks, some on dinner. Again, it'll be a mix of different users in there. And as you can see, there are all these small prep kitchens. If necessary, if an applicant or if a user wants more spaces, they can easily be, the demising wall can easily be taken down, and these units can be double sized where they are now. But there are no current tenants yet for these prep kitchens. The applicant wants to get started with the project so that they can attract some people, and they think that there are plenty of users here that have been interested in this. Number one, it's strictly for takeout. Somebody calls in an order, they tell them what they want, they sell it there in 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever the time is. The food is prepared and brought out to the counter, and if the person comes in and picks up their food at the counter and leaves, so that the number of parking spaces in the front is adequate for the people driving up and picking up their food. And it's a very convenient way because the food, very little waiting between ordering and picking up. Phone orders are the method of doing it, and consequently, we think the parking's adequate. And some of these some of these prep kitchens might be used to cook things in the morning, in the afternoon or evening, and maybe concentrating on snack areas after dinner, because there's very small space in these. The limitation will be on the type of menu they'll be able to order. Next slide. I think I have a couple more slides. This is the view on from Central Avenue heading east. That's the Golden Q. And you can see the parking in front there. That's the way it is now. And I have a slide looking from the west, approaching it from the west. That's again the Golden Q building. It's been there for a number of years. I don't know how many years, but I know it was around when I was quite younger and I actually did play billiards. And the third view I have is looking at the parking lot at the rear from Frost Place. And there'll be a door in the back there, and all trash would be picked up inside. The only other change in there, there'll be a main power panel be attached to the building at that location, pretty much there. So again, our goal is to leave the building pretty much it is, but because we're making a change and it exceeds 5,000 square feet, we're in for a conditional use permit for this project.
That it?
That's it.
Questions from the board?
Dan, what can you tell me about exhaust fans? If they're all little cooking spots, are they all going to have exhaust? The hooded fans and I forget the system called, but
Yeah, the fire protection system will be over anything that needs a hood or has got friolators or anything like that. And ventilation will be adequate. It'll go through the ceiling. And again, all the equipment and all of the kitchen rules will apply to each of these prep kitchens. They'll all have to comply with the review. We're adding a grease trap out front, and all the sinks will be connected to the grease trap. So they'll take out all grease and oil from the discharge before it goes out to the sewer. But other than that, they'll be fully complied kitchen. The Albany County Department of Health will have to issue certificates for each kitchen.
and again, tell me about where the garbage will be situated at.
It's inside the building. There's a trash room inside the building over at the right-hand corner of the building.
Okay.
And trash is kept there, and then when somebody comes, when they come, they take it out the door and pick it up.
Thank you.
Is there a sidewalk on Frost Place so that people, if they're parking in the back, can walk safely? Because I notice there's no sidewalk on the other side.
No, there's a sidewalk on Frost Place. It's got the sidewalk abuts the building. Here, it's right here. Come out of the car and go down the side of the building to the front. We think that based upon the way we anticipate this use, is the people picking up food will have adequate space in front because, like I said, they're there for a few minutes and they leave, and even if there are half a dozen people there's enough parking from out front. The 10 parking spaces in the back, we think, will be allocated for employees of the kitchens.
There's no sit down in this? It's all takeout?
No sit down at all. They can't eat their food there. They got to pick it up, put it in their car, and go someplace with it.
It's a very unusual arrangement. Is this the first of this type in the Albany area?
Yes, it is. There's nothing else like this in the Albany area that has this many users sharing a single facility.
Another example of changes caused by COVID.
Yeah. Well, takeout becomes so popular now that, and they're all different people that want it, from a small mom and pop type thing to things that do a reasonably good volume.
Further questions from the board? All right, is anybody from the public who wish to speak?
No one signed up ahead of time.
Okay,
We had a meeting with the neighborhood association, and Mr. Hyde was good enough to arrange it for us, and we had a good meeting, and they expressed some concerns. Their primary concerns were with people parking on Frost Place. We think we have enough parking on here for the employees and enough parking out front for the for the people picking up food.
Okay. All righty. Thank you very much, Dan, and we will, I'm sure, see this at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Okay, the next item on the agenda, and this is our last project item, is the 16, 18, 20 Morris Street and 353 Lark Street. This is a major development plan review and a major development plan review waiver request for the construction of a 4-story square multifamily structure with 40 dwelling units, and requested waivers to not provide on-street parking when there are 32 on-street parking spaces that are required. The applicant is Ron Stein, and the zoning district, as you can see on the screen, is multi-unit RM. Mr. Stein, you have 6 minutes.
Sorry, give me just one sec, Al. I'm just going to elevate Ron to be a panelist, and I can elevate Sarah as well. Give me just one sec. Okay, Ron and Sarah, I think you both are panelists now. Just for context for the board, we didn't get a PowerPoint from Ron, but that's pretty normal given when we have applicants who have appeared before the board before, but there's still that 6 minutes for the applicant if they want to provide any additional information.
Yeah. So this
Do you
is
have the
just, sorry.
Do you have the previous graphics and everything, if necessary, Zach? I know we've seen this before.
I can pull up previous graphics if need be. I would just have to stop the PowerPoint and just pull those up and put them into the PowerPoint, but we can do that as an as needed basis.
So
okay, that's great.
So this is strictly about the waiver first, right? Then the project second? Can you hear me? Can anybody hear me?
It would be, yep. This would be for both the waiver and the project.
I would rather talk about each one because 6 minutes is not enough, and it is the first time it's being heard because it was not supposed to be heard last time. You know, this is a major problem. You know, I'm not a fly-by-night developer. I've been investing a lot of money here in Albany. I have 3 current projects that I'm developing that are almost $20 million in development money. And to be misaligned at the last meeting, not allowed to speak, it was misrepresented to me when I actually submitted this, and it was an admitted miscommunication by the planning.
All right, Mr. Stein, we will give you the 6 minutes for each part. You don't need to go over all that. We know all of that.
I don't think we do, and I'm very upset.
So go ahead.
This is my 6 minutes. I appreciate it.
You got 6 minutes for each part.
Yep. So for this plan, and this was for the waiver, you know, it's very frustrating. I just want to clear my name because I was slandered last time. I am not the developer who wanted to ignore the waiver and at possible next board meeting, get it passed without waiver. I actually spent money and time and put a TDM together. I also submitted another presentation for this meeting to Zach and Brad Glass Monday to be presented. That was a simpler verification. The meeting, I was misaligned and misrepresented in the last meeting. I put a lot of time and effort into this to try to help the community of Albany and provide workforce housing. To be said that I'm trying to break trust and do something illegal, the only thing that has happened, I have nothing to hide. and the truth shall set us all free. This has been, I've never had and been treated like this as a developer, and it's been unfair, and other developers do not get treated this way. I have had 12 miscommunications or late information provided by the planning department since April of last year or March, since Spencer left. There are 3 projects that I had. You took a vote on a project on 191 North Pearl that there was not a lack of information when there wasn't, and there was no notification. We should have voted on that. You voted to pass for another meeting, and I lost another month of building time, and nothing was changed from the meetings. So I don't know what it is, Mr. DeSalvo and Zach, that you have personally a bias about me, or this is wrong. And we had a meeting in the mayor's office. We thought we cleared this up with Brad Glass representing, and it got worse. I made a concession I didn't even want to make on the Hackett project. I didn't think I needed to make. You know, you asked me as a planning department, I got postponed for the Hackett project for 3 months because you put it together. Popeyes called me in March of last year and asked me to get rid of the Popeyes project. That was not, I didn't even know if that was legal. You forced me to get rid of Popeyes in order for me to build Hackett. And I did what I needed to do, and I got rid of it for planning department. And now I'll come back to Lark. In April, May of last year, I presented 2 options to the planning department, both Zach Powell and Brad Glass, one with no parking, one with external parking. They asked me to present and go forward with the one with no parking. For everybody to sit here and say, I tried to squeeze something by, planning was behind me. And to note, that was in May, and I have not received a call back from planning or had a discussion with 47 requests. Now, how can I develop projects in Albany if planning department won't meet with me? Are they going to say they never met with any other developer or called them back? That I know is not true. That is bias, my friends, and unfair treatment. Now, I've tried to put a planning together. I don't know why. Is this my presentation, Zach, that the last one I sent you on Monday?
Yeah.
So we might as well just go to the last page. I'm trying to help Albany. I know there are 32 spots needed, but I get another 8 spots reduced for the 20% for affordable. As you know, workforce, I will meet that requirement easily. So it's really 24. There are other projects right down the street on 105 Morris where everybody's saying there's issues. I presented to the PSNA, the Park South meeting. I go to every meeting. I live in Park South. So I live in this neighborhood and I can park on the streets. I park on the streets. That project is only 50%, practically 50% requirement for housing. 28, they're supposed to have 16 spots. They only have 15. They didn't even meet the requirement that they were approved, and they didn't have to go before planning. I'm trying to put money into it instead of building parking. I'm trying to make it so that we don't have cars. The idea is that this would be gone to workforce, that we would be trying to reduce the parking requirement by spending money on plans, providing incentives, passes, being in the area, and actually marketing only to people without cars. We are allowed to do that. I can send out a questionnaire if whoever interested with 5 questions. One could be, do you have a car or not? And I do not need to call the people back with cars. We provide bicycle facilities, e-scooters, bicycle shares, carpool, ride share, and again, incentives and discounts. But what I've seen, and Zach sent us his comments, and from the last workshop, the decision's already been made. You're denying the waiver. And I don't understand why there's not an open mind here. All I'm doing is trying to help the community and try to provide housing, because there's increased units, without taking down existing housing to build parking, and without trying to add cars. Instead, have lack of cars and spend money on that. And everybody else gets reductions just from doing nothing. I'm actually had a conservative plan that has been worked on by a consulting group and myself, taking the plans around the country and cities of Albany size that have proven to work and reduce the amount of cars that actually are in the building. So they would come there without a car versus need parking. and bring cars. And the last piece is the people at workforce housing, they may or may not have cars. If they do, they're not going to pay for parking. And that's proven in my buildings now. The lower price units, even if they have cars, do not pay for the parking spots. So I took all that into account and trying to be proactive and help with this. And all I get from planning is not to be able to speak at a workshop, which I wasn't supposed to be at a workshop. And I was told I wasn't going to be at a workshop. I even talked to Martha, the lawyer, about Ms. Mahoney about it. And I still got the workshop. And I really do appreciate the two committee members who tried to stand up for me and got overruled, both at the July meeting for 191 North Pearl, where I wasn't allowed to speak, and last meeting at the workshop. That's all I have to say. Sad, a sad day for Albany.
Are you going to speak also on the major development plan itself?
Yeah, but I do, but I want to, are we going to vote on this? Or at least determine if there's any reduction in car spaces?
The next item after you get finished, the planning board will ask you questions, and after that, the public will speak. And then after that, we will get recommendations from the planning staff. So if you want to present.
Sure, love to present my project that nobody seems to want in Albany.
Okay. Questions from the planning board members?
Well, do I get to present the project too?
Yeah, I was waiting for you. I couldn't hear what you said.
I said I'd love to present the project.
Okay, sorry, I didn't hear that. Okay, go on.
This project is on a corner that's been empty for a long time. I worked with the ACDA. I got delayed. I've been trying to do this project since 2019. I won the bid. I was the only bidder for this back in February last year. We have a plan to do this together. And then when I approached planning to talk about the parking situation and try to do this workforce, I thought again, not to be repetitive, but they were a proponent and told me to go for the plan with no parking. I had submitted a plan with external parking, and I plan if we can't get the spot reduction or the waiver, I don't plan to change the building. The building has been through every department within the city and there's no issues with the building right now. The only issue we have is how many parking spots, and I will be doing those if I can't get a reduction. I'll be just making that. I would hope the committee would make that a condition. And I will make sure we get external parking spots that meet the code and requirement for how many you make me do. I'm here to help Albany. I was here to help Albany. I've been investing in Albany, but it doesn't seem that Albany is there. I have had no issues with historic, no issues with IDA. They've all sang my praises. No issues with Treasury. No issues with the building department. No issues with the departments of building. The only issue I've had is with planning and Mr. DeSalvo. Are there any questions? I'd love to answer them about the actual project.
Questions from the board? I don't hear any questions from the board. I'll ask again, are there questions from the board?
Yeah, Al. Mr. Stein, you mentioned that this plan that you're going to incorporate, excuse me, I have a cold and a sore throat, so sorry, that you're going to incorporate affordable housing units. Do you have a number? First of all, and it's probably a redundant question, and my apologies. How many units do you plan to have here, and how many of those units do you plan to have as affordable in their configuration, if you have that information handy?
Yeah. I hope you're feeling better. It sounds painful. And again, I do appreciate you sticking up for me in the last two meetings that I mentioned. The 40 spot, there are 40 apartment or one bedrooms, and the whatever the requirement is, I believe it's 20%, so there'll be at least 8 units of affordable. But the majority of the building would probably meet the criteria of whatever that criteria is, because I think it's above affordable, and I'm only planning to charge whether it's 1,000 or 1,100, somewhere in that range, which is actually close to the affordable level, just a slightly bit above it. But if 8 need to be below that, or if it's 20% or whatever the number is, we can make it a condition. I'll make sure it's there.
And so this property is going to be a majority of 1 bedrooms, or will it be mixed between 2 1s or studio?
All one bedrooms. And again, probably workforce, young people who can walk to work within the 20,000, almost 20,000 employee jobs in that area, who most likely are just getting out of college or there, but are looking to get a nice place, and hopefully we utilize not having a car and walking to work, or using all those different things in the TDM.
So now let's talk about the parking piece, because you're asking for a waiver to not provide any off-street parking at all. And the USDO, as it's currently written, requires that there's 32 spaces. And I understand that you're trying to attract, or you're marketing your building to be walking friendly or bike friendly. But let's, bottom line it, because you can market to whomever you want, but that doesn't mean that they may not come with a car. So how do you plan on dealing with that? So not to, displace homeowners or others in the area. The reason why we have this is because we want to make sure that as you build and develop, that the neighborhood stay within as close to its makeup as possible. So how do you plan to deal with that piece?
That's a great question. And there's a couple of ways of dealing with. Hold on one second. I'm in Albany, and there's a siren going by the hospital here. Thanks. Sorry. So there are actually 11 on-street parking spots in front of the facility, not 8 as was previously mentioned. There are 11, and the idea is, I know you can't control exactly if they come in with a car or don't come with a car, but part of that was a questionnaire, and making sure that that if they are interested in the building, they fill out the questionnaire. If they have a car, they're not marketed to. I'm not called back, and so forth. I can't tell them they can't have a car, but I can only market to people if they say they don't have one. If they come with one, I don't have to renew the lease. So maybe they're there for a few months with a car, but I do not have to renew their lease, and it's not a biased question for a car or not having a car. I did check with that. The other thing is, there are a lot of incentives in this plan. So, we're kind of paying people not to have a car. So there's going to be everything from monthly discounts for Ubers and Lyfts or taxis, Amtrak. If you use Amtrak, you get a discount. The bus companies, so car rentals, if they want to rent a car and go somewhere for the weekend. The ride share will be there. There'll be carpool. They don't take spaces either. And then it'll be walking and bike friendly, but also with the shared bike facility there as well, the CDPHP bicycle. We'll also be offering the transit pass programs for UTAP and CDTC. So all of those incentives are if you don't have a car. If you somehow then brought a car, you would lose all those incentives. So you wouldn't be able to submit receipts and get paid, and programs like that we've seen, again, work. So we're really, I know there's nothing like this in Albany, so I'm not trying to play light of it. And I do appreciate your question, and I do understand the concern. I have buildings there as well, right down the block. And the concern I see is, one, I just know if we don't market it this way, there's a potential we have 40 apartments with 40 cars that aren't using that off-street parking. So I thought maybe we could try something in the city on a decent number of basis, not crazy number, and really force these programs to see what they do and how they could work. And maybe this becomes not a precedent for no parking, because I agree it shouldn't be, but maybe this becomes a model, and we can tweak it along the way to how to put in new units in congested areas and not have cars come in. It's just, again, this wasn't just a harebrained scheme. This was something that I've been working on since May of last year, and I thought along with the planning department.
But I guess a question following up with what Ms. Giard said. If somebody is, if your tenants have a car, they'll lose all of these incentives. But if they have a car, they obviously wouldn't want those incentives. So where do they put the cars?
There's 11 spots. So I'm hoping we're effective enough that we don't have more than 5 or 6 of those people, maybe 10%, 20%, call it 8 people that somehow bring a car during the lease, that they'd started out without a car, they faked it. Again, they won't be lease renewed. I don't have to renew a lease, and it'll be in the lease worded properly. So yes, it could be a couple months. And right now, again, I just went down the street before our meeting tonight, and I parked on there were spots available everywhere after 5. I live and park there.
Mr. Stein, I'm not your legal advice. I'm not saying that. However, I'm not your legal advice, and I'm saying that I would suggest that you look at the good cause eviction that recently passed.
I did.
And you able to see
It's not
that
an eviction. It's just a non-renewal with notice.
Yeah, but I'd still look at that.
Okay, we will. I mean, I do have lawyers, and they do.
Yeah.
Nothing I do. Again, I just want to make this clear because I think I got really felt slandered at the last meeting. I have never had a violation or done anything to cheat the system or break the code. I follow it. The building, the department, if there's ever anything wrong, I fix it. I don't do anything. And I had checked with lawyers and I listened to their advice. So I will be checking with them, of course, and doing everything that was legally to be done to prevent cars. But I do feel we need to try something in the city, because otherwise we are going to get overflooded by cars. I really do.
Martin, you are a transportation expert. Maybe I'm going to put you on the spot, but do you have any questions to Mr. Stein?
Well, I think probably the one thing I'd ask is whether your research, the list of TDM measures were very interesting, very comprehensive. But did you come across any indication of how much impact the various measures would have? Are there any examples from other places? I didn't see it in the document.
I don't, because they're still, some of them are kind of new, and I didn't want to put false numbers into a document that I didn't feel comfortable doing. Anecdotally, I did check with the consultant I used, did check with a few of the cities. Several of these plans came from some California cities as well, trying to eliminate it of the same size. So there's one thing before I get there. Talking with the Albany parking department person who was on the PSNA call, he said workforce housing he's seen in Albany, the downtown workforce housing that they have, that cars are approximately 50% of what would be in a normal apartment building. So it's reduced. Just having workforce alone has and marketing has done, not even that heavy marketing, has reduced it by 50% the need for cars already. So my point is, I'm adding all of these features, and to now answer your question, Martin, they saw it go down about somewhere between 65 and 70% from what the actual would have been the parking. So we all know that right now the buildings don't have, not everybody comes with cars in downtown in Albany, in these areas. And again, in my buildings right now at the market rate, who can't afford the parking, there are 25 for 36. So it's about 65% of people have cars and don't have cars already. Mm-hmm. And that's at the higher rate. So, they do walk to the hospital. They really do.
Right.
You can come at 5:30, 6 o'clock or in the morning and see them all leave with the scrubs, or they go to the school for the medical school, the law school. And there, we're looking at, they can also from that location get to the government departments as well. And we're looking for the folks that may not be the doctors, but there are a lot of employees there that would love to live close by work and not have to take long commutes and have a nice new apartment. So that's the idea. And so do I believe it's zero? I never believed it would get to zero, to your point, but we do have 11 spots. And I know the code has changed, but I can't change my understanding because then I'd have one less floor. And, you get a floor, but you lose a floor. Because the new code, I asked, I asked the question, because I thought it was just you switch over to code, you get to use your on-street parking. The new code you do, but you can only be the same level as your neighbor. So I would only be 3-level building, and then I get the extra for putting parking there. I get the extra floor, but it's a real mess. And I've spent a lot of time on this building, getting through to the city departments to get this building approved the way it stands. So that's why I'm everybody's approved it. So I would do exterior parking, and that's why I presented that the first time back in May. But I can either do the thing that we talked about where we have, within the 300 feet, I could take down a building next door. I had an option on it before, by the way. So I wasn't just talking about it. I actually optioned the building next door and was going to tear it down and put parking. And I lost $10,000 on that because I gave up the option thinking that we were going to try for this kind of a proposal.
Okay.
What other projects, I guess that in your neighborhood that you mentioned your current tenants, I think you said 60% of them don't have cars, or 65%.
No, in the current building, 60% do have cars.
And which building is that, or where is that?
That's the 85 and 86 Dana.
85 and 86 Dana?
Yeah.
Okay. And
I actually have 3 open parking spaces right now. So because the people who are in the 86 Dana, I have 15 studios. Not one that, because I lowered the price to about 1,300. And I actually have, of those studios, I don't know if there's even one car that's in the garage. And several of them, most of them, majority of them don't. I think about 80% don't have cars, and the others that do are parking on the street because they can't afford. They got in, they love the building, mind you, thank you, but they can't afford the parking.
how many total spaces do you have in both of the projects that are open? And I guess the follow-up question would be, would they
3 between the buildings?
to be able to be rented to the tenants in this building?
Anybody? Yes, I would always share the parking with any of my buildings if they're open spaces. This is a new phenomenon that came. I used to have wait list, but people are more conservative about their money, and there were spots in the street, so they're using them. So I had people leave the garage to go to the street.
How many are open now, right now? Do you know?
I have 3 between the 2 garages.
Oh, just 3. Okay. Just want to know.
But it's the first time I've ever, in the last 6 months, that happened about 3-4 months ago. And it's weird because it's winter too. Of all the times to leave your spot, you don't usually leave a heated garage in winter. That's the time I would spend the money, and I'd get out of it in the spring or summer. So it's just a money thing right now.
With your other, I'm sorry if I cut somebody off. With your other, you mentioned that you have other parking garages. Will those garages be able to be shared with this building?
Not according to, they're not close enough to the 300 feet, or I think it's
Okay.
300 feet. So I couldn't tell you. That's why I didn't mention that. I mean, they can always park, again, if one of them is closer to their work, because I have the Pearl Street one will have a garage. Hackett is actually, so it's interesting on Hackett, I want 44 spots for 39 units. So I'm not anti-parking. I'd like it. And I just believe that building will have it because I have a lot of 2 bedrooms and it's a much higher market building. And I think I'll get people from the VA as well, or that area of the hospital, the back.
You mentioned that you had a garage on Dana, which is not far from Morris.
Yep, that's
why I
right
was
down the street.
asking.
And I don't think even the Hackett project is that far, but again, it's way beyond the 300 feet though. So I didn't.
Okay.
Have you approached either the Market 32 company or the city school district to see if there can be parking?
Oh, again, I definitely plan. Again, I don't know what the vote will be, or how many spots. Maybe you don't give all. Whatever spots I would need, that would be my first approach to go there. I just didn't know, I don't like to try to negotiate with it before I know how many spots I need, because it's a big difference. Is it 24 or a lower number, you know? And I'm not opposed to doing it because it's going to be less than building. But I'm just saying, what I have to charge, what I'm going to pay and then have to charge for parking, I truly feel there's going to be empty, but I'm going to make that happen. So one way or the other, if whatever you say, whatever the committee deems, committee response that I need or required, I will make that happen externally. And it will be, you know, if it has to be off street, it'll be through either building a parking lot, adding parking off street, or finding one of these places to rent it to me, or a combination thereof. So
I think
I'm here to help, but I just don't think it's going to be used.
I think that's an important point. Because I mean, I'm generally, I generally agree with what you're trying to do here. But I think the hard part for me is going from 32 to 0. Especially given how strongly
24.
people feel about parking.
24
Yeah.
to 0. I'd like to, no. So it's 24 to 0. Yes. I understand that.
So,
Yeah,
I would
I think
offer,
I have to agree with you as well, Martin, is trying to figure out the reason why for my questioning is very similar to yours, to figure out, knowing that area, I'm very familiar with it. How, and you mentioned the law school, those law school kids are having cars because a lot of them aren't from here. They're at the law school very late at night, especially during study, they're going to have
I agree
cars.
with that. Yep. They're also my most expensive apartments.
Yeah, I can see
So
that.
they
But I think
correlate.
it's important that, there be some exploration of what Al said of getting some parking space. I think that, I understand what you're saying about trying to have 100% non-car and having the incentives. I think the incentives are key, but I don't think that Albany's there yet. We're getting there, but we're not there yet. To explore looking at getting some of those spots and not going to 0.
So to Martin's point, it's 24 spots because I'll get the affordable piece. So that's 24 I'll need. And I do have 11 on-street parking in front. Not dedicated, we know that, but there are 11 spots out in front.
Zach, does that 11 spots meet with the criteria for the, why can't I think of it? Sheesh Louise. For the USDO?
Yeah, so the applicant's mentioning 11 spaces. So there are parking restrictions within a certain proximity to an intersection. So that reduces, about 20 feet on either side. So when you remove that space, it brings down the total number to 8 parking spaces that would count if the application is reviewed under the new zoning code, since under the previous zoning code, the parking reduction for on-street parking was only permitted for mixed use and special purpose districts, which are industrial and land conservation zoning districts. So to have that be counted as an adjustment or a reduction officially, the application would have to be processed under the new zoning code. And so as the applicant had mentioned, under the review of the new zoning code, there are height restrictions that would go into effect for approximately 8 feet of depth. I can go to a slide just to show this. So there's a height limitation of 3 stories if a building is within 25 feet of a side lot line of an abutting R2 zoning district. So a portion of the proposed 4th floor would not be permitted. However, there is the affordable housing incentive, which the applicant has stated an interest for. We would need to see evidence of, a rent or a deed restriction for that incentive to qualify. That incentive can either be used to reduce the required amount of parking or allow an increase of a story for the building height. So the applicant could have the parking, they could have the application processed through the new zoning code to qualify the on-street parking spaces. However, they would lose the ability to use the 20% reduction for affordable housing to reduce the parking by 20%.
It's like a catch-22 for me. It didn't make sense to lose a floor, gain a floor for the 8 spots. And, we'll make that conditional, and I'll, provide the proof for the affordability. It's a shame that it just missed out, because if it was, then, if it was next to a different building or had a little more space, then the 11 spots would count. And that's, maybe that's be taken into account as part of the TDM.
Is there further questions from the board or comments?
Al, I just want to mention that I'm on the same page as Martin with, going from 32 to 0 is just a big jump. I like the idea of making some arrangements for parking. I think that'll soften the blow. I don't know if, Zach, if it's in consideration that the process is going on according to the previous code requirements, that maybe some kind of allowance can be made for the 11 spaces and reducing from the 32, at least the count wide of what would be required off-site to, to be provided by the applicant. And then my other concern, Ron, if you could address is, I understand what you're trying to do, and I think it's admirable. But always in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, okay, what happens a year or two down the road when the property transfers? Does that all go to the wayside because the new landlord just is looking to make a buck?
Well, there's a couple of things. It's a good point, and I appreciate the comment. Thank you. There's a couple of things. I haven't built and sold any of the properties. I've held them, and I have a long-term strategy here for holding the properties, but that doesn't mean it can't happen. 2, there are restrictions about what you can do. And this goes back to Glenessa's thing about, I can't, just by transferring owner, you can't raise rent, and you can't not renew rent or renew, that's not a reason for ownership. And there's limits to $50 a month for what you can raise right now. So you really can't take too much advantage of it that way. Plus, again, I think the programs will take off and be popular, and it's cost effective to do it that way.
Okay, so you're implying is like if it's like a project-based subsidization or whatever, subsidized because it'll have like a long-term encumbrance on the property?
That's what I'm going to try to do.
Okay. Well, then that would definitely have an impact on it. So, okay.
And it also my pro forma wouldn't work either. So it's all related. So yeah, I'm when I do look at these things, I do think about the long term as well.
Okay, appreciate that.
Further questions? Okay, hearing none. Do we have anybody from the public who would like to speak?
So no one signed up within 24 hours. Someone had emailed prior to the meeting if they could speak, and I just let them know that I would defer that to the board since it was noticed that people had to sign up 24 hours in advance, but just wanted to relay that since that was a discussion point at the last meeting, if the board did want to take public comment.
Does the board want to take public comment even though they didn't sign up 24 hours in advance?
Yes.
That's fine.
Yep. Yes.
Okay.
Okay, I hear a
All right,
consensus.
give me just 1 sec. I'm just gonna transition over.
While you're doing that, I'll remind whoever wants to speak that you have 3 minutes. Zach will have a timing device. And again, I urge anybody who wants to make comment to put your comments also in writing, so we have a solid record of it, and it can be easily retrieved whenever the public wants to see the record.
Um, uh, so Andrew Harvey had requested to speak. Andrew, you're now able to unmute, which I think you have. I'll have a timer on the screen for 3 minutes. It should give a warning color when 30 seconds are left, just to kind of give you a heads up when your time has expired, and feel free to start whenever you're ready.
Well, thank you everyone for accommodating my request. I was errant in getting back to Zach ahead of time. I have already submitted some comments to the planning board regarding the Park South Neighborhood Association meeting that was held last Wednesday. I am Andrew Harvey. I'm president of the Neighborhood Association. And I did speak before you last October. I'm not going to be reading my statement that I submitted to you. I just wanted to highlight some concerns that I have. They're just to reinforce a lot of what I had to say back in October. I have been part of the Park South community for over 30 years, and I've been president of the Neighborhood Association now for 27 years. So I know Park South. And back in 2003, given the chaos that was reigning here in Park South, the city saw to it that we should engage in the development of an urban renewal plan. And for almost 3 years, we engaged in a very arduous but rewarding process, the fruit of which was the Park South Urban Renewal Plan. So in looking at that plan, there were some very significant objectives that were highlighted. And one of those objectives was the rehabilitation of the block of Morris Street between Lark and Knox Streets. And that block has about 42 family houses on it that only 4 are presently owner occupied, and many of them are not in really good shape. Back in 2006, the urban renewal plan reads, the rehabilitation project for the 2 family units on Morris Street is intended to recognize one of the more common and distinctive building types within the neighborhood. While these homes are not identified as historic, their repetitive pattern results in a distinct collection of buildings that contributes a great deal to the grain and fabric of the neighborhood. And so looking at what we've achieved so far, we've done a marvelous job on Knox Street. The section of Madison Avenue is coming along fine, but Morris Street is still a work in progress. And given that parking, from my observations going through the neighborhood at 9 o'clock at night, is really pretty tight on that block, the desirability of having parking on the block and buying a home on that block is important for the board to consider as we go forward. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Harvey. Any other comments from the public?
No one else has requested to speak.
Okay. Zach, then would you please give the planning department's recommendations?
Yes, just give me 1 second. I'm just trying to switch back to the presentation, so bear with me just 1 second. Okay, so I had provided some of this information in the memo to the board members, but I'll just go over that for members of the public who have not seen that. This content was uploaded in a staff recommendation to the project development review site. That was unfortunately not working for some portion of time this week. It is back up and running, so apologies for members of the public who were not able to use that prior to the meeting. So just kind of as a recap, the board discussed the waiver request at the January workshop. And as part of the presentation that I gave, I identified some of the available options that are in the USDO for ways to reduce the parking requirements for the project. So just going through these slides just to provide an update on some of the content related to that. For the affordable housing incentive, the applicant has expressed an interest for applying for this, but they have not provided supporting documentation on how they would meet that through either rent or deed restrictions. For shared parking, the proposed project is only one use, so it's not available to this project. The applicant could add an additional use to the site, but that would increase the requested waiver size since there would be more parking required and it's counterintuitive. For on-street parking, as I had mentioned previously, the parking reduction is not available under the previous USDO since it's located in a residential district. Under the current USDO, the on-street parking adjustment could apply to the project. However, the proposed height of the building would conflict with one of the dimensional standards within the table 375-401.1, which limits the height of any principal structure within 25 feet of a side or rear lot line of an abutting R2 zoning districts to 3 stories or 35 feet. This was the graphic that I just showed previously, showing that a portion of the proposed building is within that 25-foot buffer. So approximately 1,000 square feet of that building would not comply. As I also mentioned, the applicant could utilize the affordable housing incentive to increase the maximum permitted height of the building by 1 story, but then would not be able to use this incentive towards reducing the off-street parking requirement by 20%. We had notified the applicant through the workshop and through an email, just letting them know about this, and they replied that they'd prefer the application be reviewed under the previous zoning code. Off-site parking, this was just brought up, but just as a reminder, Market 32 and the city right-of-way behind Hackett Middle School, which is used as a parking lot, are the only available parking areas within a 300-foot buffer of the site. We have not received any evidence that the applicant has tried to come to an agreement with either of those parties to use those parking lots for parking for the proposed project. For the parking demand study, so the applicant had submitted a parking demand study and transportation demand management plan, which is also known as a TDM. The application or the TDM document was submitted to support the waiver request, but it was not submitted to the chief planning official for a formal reduction by the chief planning official. In the plan that was submitted, the applicant identifies the existing transportation networks through CDTA, sidewalks, and bicycle routes and infrastructure, and proposes strategies to reduce the use of single occupancy vehicles. Under the USDO, the submitted plan must demonstrate that the resulting traffic demand shall not result in traffic congestion in the surrounding area, and that the resulting off-street parking provided, which in this case is 0, shall not result in on-street parking congestion in the surrounding area. From what was submitted, it describes the existing networks, but did not provide evidence, on existing patterns for parking usage in and around the site, and did not provide evidence connecting that the TDM strategies and the amount of off-street parking provided would not result in parking congestion in the surrounding area. The Albany County Planning Board, our office referred this application to them as well. At their meeting, they modified local approval to include the following items. 1, review by the county's Department of Health for water supply, wastewater discharge, and other required permits. Two, that the local fire department should be notified to evaluate for public safety, emergency services access, water availability, and any sprinkler system that may be required by building code. Three, they recommended that the planning board deny the waiver request for parking requirements due to the lack of parking in downtown Albany. And four, they recommended that the applicant should meet the minimum requirement of 32 parking spaces, which could otherwise potentially set a precedent for future developments. The first two, the application will be reviewed by the County Department of Health and has been reviewed and approved by the fire department as noted by the applicant. And then the fourth recommendation is language that we see frequently for area variances that are referred to the county. And since waivers kind of operate on a very similar principle, that is a somewhat standard comment to receive from the county planning board for that request. So these are the recommended actions. For seeker, the recommended action is a negative declaration. For the waiver, the recommended action is a denial. And then for the overall development plan review, the recommended action is a deferral, given that I think there's been expressed interest from members in the surrounding area that a multi-unit building would make sense at the site. I think some of the comments have related to the size and scale and some of the amenities provided, such as parking, kind of dictate whether they support or do not support the project. So again, while we are recommending a denial for the waiver, the recommended deferral is to provide an opportunity for the applicant if they want to revise the application. I'm gonna go through the review of the waiver standards and the staff comments for those. If there's any questions as I go through these, or any disagreement, if the board wishes to deny the application or disagrees with the process for this, feel free to speak up. Because if the board does deny the waiver, then these comments would be used as the basis for that decision. Are there any questions before I proceed with the review of the waiver standards?
Is there any requirements that we have in terms of how many votes, given the Albany County recommendations? If we override the county recommendations for number 3 and 4, do we need a supermajority?
Yeah, thank you for the reminder on that, Al. So it would need to be majority plus 1. So for the case of the planning board, if the board chose to override one or more of the recommendations from the county planning board, there would have to be a vote of at least 4 board members for that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I discussed these at the meeting on the 11th. So I'll try and run through the language in the standards somewhat quickly, but take a little more time with the review. For the first standard, whether an undesirable change would be produced in the character of the neighborhood or a detriment to nearby properties. The omission of on-site parking would not produce an undesirable change in the character of the neighborhood. Since parking is not occupying the ground floor, the applicant has been able to provide a design that is more consistent with the character of the existing neighborhood. While there may be environmental impacts on the surrounding area, there would not be a detriment to the properties or buildings through the granting of this waiver. The second review standard is whether the benefits sought by the applicant can be achieved by some method feasible for the applicant to pursue other than a waiver. So again, as a reminder, multi-unit buildings have a base parking requirement of 1 off-street parking space per unit. The project site's within a quarter mile of a transit route with a peak frequency of 15 minutes or better, which is Route 13 through CDTA. So that reduces the required amount of parking from 40 spaces to 32. I just went through some of these alternatives and adjustments as well, which are methods that are potentially feasible to reduce the requested waiver. The applicant has expressed interest in applying for the affordable housing incentive, but they have not provided supporting documentation on how the required rent or deed restrictions would be implemented. As well, the applicant has referenced that there were 8 on-street parking spaces in front of the project site, and they are seeking a universal access agreement with CDTA as part of a transportation demand management plan measure or strategy. A copy of the universal access agreement with CDTA was requested on December 28th and has not been provided. And as I've mentioned a few times, for the parking spaces to count towards the on-street parking reduction, they would have to have the application be reviewed under the new zoning code. The option to have the application reviewed under the new zoning code has not been sought by the applicant. For the off-site parking adjustment, the applicant could submit evidence of at least a 2-year lease agreement for a legal parking lot within 300 feet of the project site. The only larger parking areas, so basically, not a parking areas that are not part of a single family or 2-family dwelling. The only areas that are located within 300 feet of the site are the Market 32 parking lot and the city right-of-way used for parking at Hackett Middle School. The applicant has not provided evidence that they have attempted to seek parking agreements with either Market 32 or the city for these spaces. And in addition to these adjustments and incentives, the applicant could utilize a different building footprint or configuration to allow for surface or garage parking on the site. That could reduce or fully eliminate the need for the waiver request. As of today, we haven't received a reason why the proposed footprint is the only available footprint or building design that could be used. And based on these factors, there are other methods available to the applicant to either reduce the size of the requested waiver or eliminate it to achieve the same benefit. As mentioned by the applicant, they had submitted a some previous configurations or designs. Some of those designs included demolishing a neighboring structure. There was also another design submitted, granted with a smaller number of proposed units, but would have included a surface parking lot in the area where 353 Lark Street is right now as well. Planning staff did recommend to the applicant that design that proposes to demolish, an existing and habitable dwelling not be pursued. The use and retention of that building is preferred over providing parking, but there are other options and other configurations that could enable on-site parking to be provided as part of the project. For the third review standard, whether the requested waiver is substantial, it is quantitatively substantial, being 100% deviation from the current requirement. There are transportation demand management strategies that are recommended to reduce usage, but it does not provide data on existing parking demand and does not demonstrate that the proposed practices will reduce single occupant vehicle use, ease traffic congestion, or result in on-street parking congestion in the surrounding area, or the elimination of any potential parking congestion in the surrounding area. Based on the current information that's been provided, the requested waiver is substantial. The fourth review standard is whether it would have an adverse impact on the physical or environmental conditions of the neighborhood or district. Again, without the data on existing parking patterns and an analysis in the TDM plan showing whether or not the proposed strategies would mitigate or prevent parking congestion, it's unclear whether the proposed waiver would create any negative impacts on the conditions of the surrounding neighborhood. And the fifth review standard is whether the alleged difficulty was self-created, which consideration shall be relevant to the decision of the planning board, but shall not necessarily preclude the granting of the waiver. This is a self-created difficulty, but again, as mentioned in the standard, it is not dispositive, so that does not mean the board has to deny simply since the difficulty was self-created.
Zach, can you go to item number 1 and explain in the verbiage what is meant by environmental?
This is speaking to the character of the built environment. The standard is speaking to the character of the built environment. So because there's no parking being proposed, it's not changing the character of buildings in the surrounding area. This response is saying that there might be, environmental impacts.
Yes, I'm trying to understand what the environmental impact would be.
If there's, traffic congestion or any issues related to, potentially people loading and unloading if they're using rideshare, stuff like that, that would be the potential kind of environmental impact. So more just related to traffic.
And you're saying there wouldn't be?
So it's more that this review standard is not really speaking to traffic impacts. It is more speaking to impacts on the building character or character of the built environment. So, omitting parking is allowing for, a design that is, right up to the lot line, which is consistent with the design of other buildings in the area. And it's, but essentially that's not taking into consideration, any traffic impacts that might be created, whereas the fourth review standard addresses those traffic impacts.
Okay, because your use of the word environmental impact there threw me a little bit. And then item number 2, with you talking about the affordable. If there was documentation provided, what is the reduction then from the 32 for affordable?
Yeah, so that would reduce it another 20% if the applicant is looking to have the application be reviewed under this code, so then it would reduce it to 24.
Okay.
But he's having it reviewed under the old code, so this was not relevant.
No, so the affordable housing incentive is available under the old code as well. So the applicant could apply for the use of that while the application is being reviewed under the old zoning code.
Okay. So if my math is working correctly, and it's been a long time since elementary schools, 40 minus the 20% for the bus line, get you 32 minus 20% for the affordable, because he said there will be deed restrictions, so you'll have documentation regarding a deed, which will express the restrictions in place, get you to 24. And then the discussion about the on-site, the credit for the on-site, I'm sorry, the off-site, directly in front of the property. How does that come to play again?
Yeah, so for the for the on-street parking to count as a formalized reduction under the USDO, the application would need to be reviewed under the current USDO and not the previous USDO. So once the application is being reviewed under the new USDO, then the 8 spaces that are on street in front of the site would count towards a reduction. So that would take that from 32 to 24. However, with the current design, there is a portion of the building that is 4 stories and within 25 feet of a side lot line, of an adjacent side lot line with an R2 district. So a portion of that building would not comply with the dimensional standards. So, the applicant could revise the site plan to either eliminate the portion of the 4-story that's within 25 feet, or they could apply for the affordable housing incentive and utilize that incentive to add a story to the building.
Okay, understand. And just to be clear, under the previous zoning that was in place when the applicant filed, there was no benefit for the on-street parking spaces. Okay,
Correct.
all right. So the magic number is 24 from my math.
Right.
I gotta think that something can be done as far as finding the applicant making arrangements for parking as was available. And the question is that the full 24 or percentage of that? I don't know. I'll defer to my other board members for that. But I think that may be a reasonable resolution.
I agree. I think that the important thing, is that we need to see evidence that there is, like the rules state, a lease agreement. We need to see a plan to show that these will be followed up. We would also have to agree on the number that we would allow based on a transportation management plan that goes beyond just thoughts and ideas, but a solid one that addresses these issues. Because some of the TDM ideas certainly can work. They've worked in other projects that we reviewed, whether it's the bus incentives or the Lyft or Uber incentives, things like that.
So just to confirm, Robin, you're saying that we wind up at 24 just based on what's available in the zoning code at this point. So it doesn't include any waiver.
In the old code, and Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, the base requirement's 40, but he's close to the bus line, so he gets a 20% reduction, brings you to 32. Then he plans on having the affordable housing element,
Right.
which is another 20% reduction, which brings you down to 24. So if you have a requirement of 24, to me, that doesn't seem as astronomical. If you can, make arrangements offsite. And I agree with Al, it's simple. It's a matter of receiving documentation that there is a lease negotiations in place, at least a 2-year lease for the parking, for sufficient number of parking spaces, as well as a copy of the deed restrictions, if that's the way that the restricted rents are going to be applied.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay.
Yeah, I have a question for council.
Yeah.
Is there a method by which we are able to use the full breadth of parliamentary procedure and enter into executive session?
Could you hold on 1 second, please?
Certainly.
I'll just, confirm that this is inappropriate entering into.
Were you deferring to me, Martha?
And she's probably
Oh.
looking up availability in
Oh.
the public off,
Yes,
public meetings
sorry.
law.
Yep. So yeah, it's 7:43. I'll have an answer. Just give me 2 minutes till 7:45, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Martin, we got 2 minutes. What have you, or less, what have you actually seen then? I know we discussed this before, but regarding parking and if, in the actual projects we've seen in the last couple of years, how much the parking actually has been required versus how much has actually been utilized? Have you had any data from that?
No, and I would love to get hold of some. I've mentioned that a few times. I think that would be incredibly valuable, given what a major issue it is. And certainly anecdotal evidence is that we need less parking than we thought we did, a number of years ago. So that's a good thing, but it varies a lot by location, right? If it's something in downtown, it's one thing. If it's something out in a outer neighborhood, it's another thing. And it would be, like I said, it would be great to actually get those numbers. Certainly, a lot of cities are moving towards lower parking requirements. And Albany did. We did in the USDO less requirements of the previous code.
One of the participants in the meeting did text and mention that that the Albany Parking Authority does have some information on that.
Correct. That's right.
I mean, one of the
Hello.
issues. Yeah.
Oh, no, sorry to interrupt, Al.
Okay.
Should
What did you
interrupted
say?
So unfortunately, I think it would be a very tenuous stretch to say that executive session could be authorized. There is one of the enumerated subject matters that we could go into executive session would be for the proposed acquisition, sale, or lease of real property. And in this case, there is somewhat of a proposed sale of real property, and that the Albany Community Development Agency conditioned the disposal of 16 to 20 Morris Street on the project receiving approval from the planning board, but the planning board still isn't the entity that would be disposing or selling the real property. It's still ACDA. And I don't see any of the grounds under New York State Public Officers Law that would allow for executive session.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
So we will press on. I think that we have 3 recommendations. One is a negative declaration for seeker. The second is to deny the waivers, and the third is to defer, presumably so that we can see a more solid proposal from the applicant about how to deal with the requirements. Now, besides that, we could either right now try to work out a recommendation on the number of parking places, or do that when the applicant comes back with some solid information and works out an agreement with either the city school district or Market 32, and also regarding the affordable housing. So
I have a question for you, Al. It's more procedural than anything. Do
Yeah.
we do we have to, I hear your recommendations. So can we just state what we're requiring as the planning board as the number of spots and making conditional and have the applicant figure out how he's going to fulfill that? Because he can't move forward without being able to provide some type of proof that he's obtained those spots. Just my thinking.
Yeah, I mean,
see what
I
you
think
mean.
that's one of the things I did suggest is that we could tonight come up with a recommendation as to how many spots is required.
I
But
think
he-
I would prefer that in the interest of time to move this application forward. If we're willing to approve the project, to put conditions on it, because it seems like there's also some other outlying and outstanding things that the applicant needs to do as well from going through Zach's memo.
Right.
But if we condition it, we have to condition it also on his proof that of how he could go from 40 to 24.
Right.
But
No,
I thought
I
that
agree.
was as of right, though. I mean, that was things in the zoning code that allowed him to do that. Is the TDM plan required for
Zach
those?
stated that there was no plan for the so in order for him to get it as of right, one of the criteria was the affordable housing piece. And Zach in his memo stated that piece was missing.
Correct. Right.
So he would have to
Yeah.
provide proof of the affordable housing piece in order to
Okay,
get
and
that exemption.
So I guess my question then would be, what is the TDM plan for? What purpose does it serve as in terms of calculating the number of spaces?
I would actually defer to you,
Yeah.
Martin, in that one. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think, I think you could potentially justify a number of additional additional reduction in the number of spaces beyond even lower than 24, based on the thoroughness of the TDM plan. How it goes beyond just being near a bus line and that sort of thing. So, the exact number, I'm not sure. I wonder if is that listed in the USDO, or is that something that's up to our discretion?
So for the parking reduction through a parking demand and TDM plan, the reduction is done by the chief planning official. So the chief planning official would have the discretion on how many spaces would be reduced based on the submission of the plan. The plan was submitted to support the waiver application and was not submitted for a formal reduction by the chief planning official. If the applicant would like to submit a plan, the current plan or a revised plan to the chief planning official for a reduction, that could potentially reduce the requested waiver additionally. And I would say, it seems like the board is potentially looking to request additional information for the application. This is a waiver and they're reviewed almost identically as an area variance, which is typically done by the Board of Zoning Appeals. And really the planning board is trying to grant the minimum waiver necessary in order to achieve the benefit sought, which in this case is constructing a multi-unit building with 40 units in it. So, as part of that second review standard, it's ensuring that the applicant has exhausted all potential options in order to reduce the waiver, as much as possible in order to ensure that that requested waiver is as small as possible to get to the end goal, which is allowing for the construction of a multi-unit building with 40 dwelling units. So I think in whatever items are requested, that's part of the end goal, because that's a review standard and requirement that the board has to consider to make sure that essentially, every stone, that every stone is not unturned, essentially addressing every available option to the applicant.
So it's based on if the applicant looks for rental parking nearby and finds, a certain number, we could potentially close the gap using, if the TDM plan is adequate. Does it have to
It's
go in that
essentially-
direction?
It's essentially exhausting, every available option, that's provided within the USDO that's applicable. And if they've exhausted all of those options, then they could provide additional evidence, such as maybe a parking agreement that's beyond 300 feet from the site, to support a waiver application. But it wouldn't be, formally recognized as an adjustment or a reduction through the USDO.
Okay, so if I'm hearing you correctly, then the base requirement 40, the bus line, that's a given 20%. There's no mystery there. The applicant has to show some proof that there will be affordable units to get that 20% reduction. The applicant then has to show the leases in place, or anticipate leases in place for parking in order to meet at least a substantial part of the remaining 24 unit requirement, and then submit it to the TDM, to the chief planning official, in order to offset the difference between what he's able to obtain in leasing versus the 24. Is that correct?
Correct. And for those parking leases, a parking lease would have to be for a legal lot that's within 300 feet of the project site. If it's not within 300 feet, then it wouldn't count as a reduction for the offsite parking reduction, but it could support a waiver application or part of the waiver application, or part of the TDM and parking demand plan.
And
How do we condition
two
that?
locations are within 300 feet that we've already talked about.
Right.
Yeah.
So the bottom
Right.
line here is either that we defer this until all of this is done, or we approve with conditions, and we name in the condition the number of parking units that we feel is acceptable to the board and makes sense for this development. So we could come up with a number that makes sense to us, and the developer would be bound and would have to show as a condition to the planning staff the leases and the rental requirements, and the number of, and then once we come up with a number of parking units.
Zach, from your experience, when someone submits a TDM plan, how much of a reduction to parking is actually obtained or realistic?
In the one other that I can think of for 67 Livingston Avenue, that received the reduction for the deficit in spaces. The applicant did secure leases with the parking authority garage as well. So they had a combination of lease agreements, transit reduction, and they were also a site that included units for people who were working for the Palace Theater and Cap Rep as part of their program. So there were connections to employers that were within a block from the site as well, which have a slightly different impact or impact on the review of the application. As Martin has brought up, and I think I may have brought up, there have not been too many TDM plans submitted for review for reduction before. So this is a newer set of strategies, and this was somewhat mentioned by Glenisa and other members of the board as well. But again, the final reduction if it's submitted to the chief planning official, is at the chief planning official's discretion. And again, it's based on that evidence of, demonstrating that the proposed strategies are going to prevent any parking congestion that's related to the site or prevent any congestion for on-street parking in and around the site as well.
Okay, Al, so here's my thoughts. I would be willing to make a motion to move forward with this, with the restrictions that, or with the requirements that documentation is provided confirming the affordable housing units and that 20% reduction, bring it down to a minimum requirement of a parking of 24 units, and that those 24 unit requirement is met by either leases, 2-year leases that meet the 300-foot requirements, spaces, or in the combination of that with submission of the TDM to the chief planning official to make the difference. And to
That
me, I
sounds
think
reasonable.
that would be reasonable for all parties.
Yeah, I agree.
How's the other planning board members feel about that?
I agree.
Same.
Okay,
Well, let's rock and roll here.
all right. So
Good work, Robin.
the first item is the State Environmental Quality Review Act negative declaration. Do I hear a motion to approve?
So
So
moved.
moved.
Moved by
Seconded.
Lenny Sr. and seconded by Martin Hall. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, the second item would be not to deny the waiver and not to defer, but instead to go with the motion that Roman Kuchera made. And in order for us to get this down in writing, can you restate the motion?
I will try. So I make a motion to approve the waiver in the extent that the parking requirements would be met, starting with the base 40 units, and then the bus line reduction, which is in place per code for 20%, bring it down to 32 units, that the remaining number of units, 32, are further reduced by documentation provided to verify that there are affordable housing units in place to allow an additional 20% reduction to 24 parking space requirement, and that 24 parking space requirement would be met by either a combination of 2-year minimum leases with parking within the 300-foot requirement, along with the submission by the applicant to the chief planning official of the TDM to offset any of the parking space requirement that the 2-year leases can't meet from the 24 units.
Second.
Second.
Second by Martin Hall. Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, approved. I don't hear any abstentions or negatives.
Al, do we still got to go through the third item as well?
No, because we're not deferring. That was a condition. All righty. That concludes the project part of the meeting. And we now want to move to other business. And I think we can move through this fairly quickly because
Al, just to clarify real quick, the board does not want to act on the development plan review. The board just acted on the waiver, but not the development plan review itself. So
I'm
just
sorry.
wanted to make sure that that was clear. just before we moved on to
Okay,
other
can you
business.
go back? Can you go back to the, I got my notes here, I'm sorry. Okay, so the major development plan review itself, we've talked so much about the issue of parking and the parking waiver. That is actually acting on the development itself, right? On the,
That
on the
would be
building.
acting. Yes.
Okay,
If the board wanted to act on that, I just wanted to clarify that the board just only acted on the waiver.
right. So I would entertain a motion to approve the major development plan as it was presented, which was the actual project site in the building.
So moved.
Moved by Roman Kuchera. Is there a second?
Second. That's Mark.
Second by Martin Hall. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Okay, it's unanimous. All right, we're on record approving the development plan itself. Okay. Now we are on to other business on the board.
Okay, so moving into other business, there were just a number of topics that I think have been discussed at previous meetings, both by myself and I think other planning board members, and it just seemed like the appropriate time just to catch up on some issues going on. This is just kind of an overall list of items to talk about. Some of them were brought up by Al in an email he sent with kind of these topic areas earlier in the day, and some of these things have been brought forward by our department or kind of in a combination with a number of different people. So I think I'll just try and go through these quickly. The first is registering to provide comments at meetings and hearings. So starting at the January meeting, we included information in the agenda and on the planning board website that members of the public had to submit written comments 48 hours in advance so that we can comply with updated New York laws that require access to documents that are referenced and used during public meetings just within 24 hours in advance. And also just a request to for any public speakers to sign up at least 24 hours in advance. I think there was a little bit of, I think some people were just not aware since that was the first meeting where that applied. This is the second meeting where that applied, but there was an instance where public comments were taken for a project when someone didn't sign up 24 hours in advance. So just checking in to see where people felt on that, and if things need to be modified, they can. You know, some of the goal of that was just providing additional time for staff to be able to prepare for taking in comments and making sure that the meetings run smoothly, but just passing that to the board so that you have the opportunity to confirm whether that's the right approach.
Yeah, and I would say to the board that this is something that all three of the boards would require.
You're muted, Chris. Oh, sorry.
In a discussion that we had with staff members and the board chairs for the other two boards, the 24-hour notice is something that will be implemented for all three of the boards.
I think that's important, so everyone kind of knows what to expect.
We're trying to be consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah, you. I mean, on the 24 hours. I think one of the things that we should be somewhat liberal on it because it's new, and you know, I don't think for the most part, outside of the normal folks that come to our meetings that are representing developers, heads of neighborhood associations and or elected officials, other folks that come usually are coming for their first time, speaking for their first time, and probably are not going to be aware of policy and procedure. And I think we should consider that. Same way council today was saying there are specific reasons why we can go to executive session. I think there should be specific reasons why we should, you know, wouldn't want the public to be able to get an opportunity to speak. I probably, as much as anybody, would love not to be in 3-hour meetings, but at the end of the day, this is the job we signed up for, and this is the public good that we're supposed to be trying to advance. So if people want to talk, people want to talk.
Right, we already limited them to 3 minutes, so that helps a lot in that regard.
Well, that's the other reason why we're trying to encourage written comments where they can, that would be on the record, and it's also now required. The problem with people signing up right instantly is that, you know, if we're in the middle of a discussion of a project and then somebody says they want to speak, I don't think that's appropriate. I think there needs to be a little bit of planning and a little bit of lead time before somebody just decides on the spur of the moment to make a comment. I don't disagree, Chris, with what you said, but the way it's been is that we've had people trying to talk in the middle of a project and suddenly want to jump on, you know, while we're in the public session and people are making public comments, and then somebody else wants to jump on top of that.
And I don't disagree with that, Al, but what I would say is that those folks are probably reacting to something that has been presented by the developers, something that they have not seen. You get, hey, there's a notice that this meeting has happened, this project is happening, it's going to affect your neighborhood. Maybe you hear about it in a neighborhood meeting, maybe you don't. Then you show up and you hear something, and pretty much this is your only time to talk about it, you know. So I'm on the record where I stand on it. I don't want to squash the voice of the people, you know, but we can go with the will of the majority. That's why we're a committee.
Yeah. And as just to give my 2 cents, I also agree with Chris. I understand that you know, it's a lot harder to deal with when we're on Zoom. However, when we are out at the when we're in person, we allow people to sign up, and then we look at the list at that time, and people do sign up while the applicant or we are speaking. Mainly to Chris's point, they hear something that gives them pause, where they have questions, want parsed out. So I don't believe, you know, I think you do a great job in telling people, you know, the ground rules in speaking. I just think that if we're going to allow them to sign up on the list in person, we should allow them the same courtesy, even though we're on Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of the same idea. I think maybe just if you're going to have this, you know, and you're saying encouraging written comments in the 24 hours, but then maybe put in parentheses, you know, anyone not meeting these requirements, would be up to discretion of the board whether it would be allowed or something like that. Give us some leeway so that, you know, we can kind of determine if we want to allow it. In other words, if we've got 20 people talking on a project, do you really need a 21st to offer a similar point of view? Maybe not. But if you have only 2 or 3 people and it's only 7 o'clock, maybe yes. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tend to agree with that as well. I mean, I go to a lot of board meetings and a lot of committee meetings and things like that, and generally the public is allowed to speak, you know, without prior notice, for all the reasons you guys just mentioned.
Okay, so what's on that one then? We will allow people to speak up to the meeting, and if it's agreeable to everybody, if it's a project that there's only a couple of speakers and more people want to speak, that's fine. But if there's a whole lot of people that have already spoken, can we use our discretion to say we have to limit it?
If they didn't sign up in advance. In other words, put your, like you said, encourage. Encourage means we would like you to do this. It's not a requirement. It's encouragement. So we would like the written comments. We'd like you to sign up within the 24 hours so that we can have adequate time for everyone to speak their piece.
Right.
If you submit that you would like to speak on a project after that 24-hour time frame, we will try our best to accommodate you, but there's always a possibility that time won't allow it or circumstances won't allow it.
Right. Or maybe we could further limit how long they can speak. I don't know if that's silly or not, but make it a minute and a half or 2 minutes for latecomers.
Well,
Just to avoid things going crazy. That's difficult to administer.
Yeah.
You're muted, Chris.
is that
Hey, I'm sorry.
acceptable, Chris?
Can you repeat that last part again? I'm managing a 3-year-old trying to get her to bed.
Sure. Was that me or Roman's last thing?
No, I'm not the 3-year-old. You are.
Let's see. I think Roman said that we would say that it would be conditional if you speaking if you hadn't signed up 24 hours in advance, it would be conditional on time availability, and that's.
I mean, I think
you could just say if conditions allow or something.
I think that I understand what we're saying.
I'm fading.
Yeah, in other words, you're either leaning back or your voice goes in and out. So like what you said.
Yes,
that time
I received the sentiment, and I think with our discretion, we've done pretty good. I just want to caution us on this because at the end of the day, the people that we will end up almost silencing are going to be those that are the least informed, probably those that are most disconnected to the process, those that may be elderly or really young, those that may be of certain economic background. It's going to be folks that are unfamiliar with our work and our proceedings. And I'm just cautioning the board as we think about that's where we would be. There could be, some real ramifications. And those are the folks we probably want to hear from the most, right? So.
No, I think we agree.
Put something in the text.
I think we agreed that we would allow everybody to speak who wants to speak, unless if there's just a huge amount of people who've spoken, and
we don't want redundant content. So Al, let me say this. I am 100% aware of the stress that this adds to the meeting, the complexity that adds to your job as chair, and I respect that, right? So I don't want to go overboard on this. And ultimately, we have to be able to provide conditions that allow you to manage our work in these public settings, and I'm in support of that. So I'm with the conditional piece. I think the members of the board have been really fair, and making sure that we, even when people are gruff and antagonistic, that we still allow for this public space to be used in the spirit of the law. So, I'm good with it. And Martha, okay. I see what your remark about the 3 minutes to provide remarks on an application. I see that. I understand that.
While we're on that topic, though, I think one of the things that we do want to do is to disable the chat. And we talked about that. Now, as long as technically people who want to speak can still be able to speak, that can, is there a raised hand, or is there a way that the chat, which is very distracting, and as you could see from the way that Ron Stein handled it at the last meeting and this meeting, continually throwing out all of these different comments and everything. But is there a way that we can allow people to speak while we're considering a project if the chat is disabled? Zach?
So Al, let me make a comment on this piece too, because I definitely understand where you're coming with, and I had to deal with this in meetings that where I'm the chair. If we were in person, we would not allow a person to blurt out comments while their presentation was going, or while there was exchange between members of the board and or the planning staff was doing their presentation. None of that would be allowed. So I think that there are appropriate times to allow for the chat, maybe before the meeting, maybe during an intermission piece or something like that. But I find it to be distracting as well when we're doing when we're conducting business. And I think that, you know, you could run into some issues there. And a lot of the meetings that I've had, that's been where it's the board engaging with either other members of the board or some particular body or committee or something like that, we've shut down the chat.
Well, again, Zach, I wanted to ask you if technically we can allow people to speak when they want to without, is there a raised hand or some way they could communicate with you?
Yeah, I think the raised hand function should still be able to be utilized without there necessarily being a chat function. And I think there's different levels of, you know, the chat function that are able to be utilized. I personally think it would be better to remove all chat function altogether. Just that, because that creates a form of discussion potentially between people that, you know, when it's a public meeting, you know, all information should be public at that time, you know, and any questions or comments should be raised in a format where, you know, everyone attending has the ability to hear that. So
Well, that's
my personal
with,
opinion is that yes.
Yeah, it's consistent with what we're saying and what Chris mentioned too. It's just as long as the public has a chance to still make comments, and, you know, that, and you could see that they want to speak. That's all.
Yeah, I think with the raise hand feature, that should still work. Again, for, you know, someone who's joining by phone or by Zoom, that should still be able to work.
Okay. Well, let's move on then to conflict of interest and planning board alternates.
Yeah, the conflict of interest disclosure form. This is a pretty quick one. I've mentioned this, I think, at previous meetings as well, but I'm kind of in the nascent stages of working with Martha to develop a conflict of interest disclosure form. That's essentially just listing, you know, any organizations that you might work with or participate with, just so that we have kind of a baseline understanding of that, so that, you know, as planning staff and legal counsel, we're able to anticipate conflicts of interest, you know, earlier on in the process to prevent situations where that's identified, you know, halfway through or right at the end of a project review. And I think, you know, this is going to be a continuing discussion and identification point during all meetings, but just keep a lookout for that. I think we're not going to get as specific as identifying like a particular amount if you have like a financial interest with an organization or a company, but I think that probably would be something where we would want those listed just as a potential conflict of interest going forward, just so that that's also identified. You know, again, I don't think we are trying to get to the level of detail that, some political appointees are required to comply with, for New York State. But we are just trying to make sure that we're identifying these situations earlier on, for your protection, and also just to make sure that the review doesn't create any, legal hiccups in terms of someone reviewing an application when they shouldn't be. But if there's any questions, concerns with that, that's kind of what this is for, just to address that as Martha and I are working on this.
Yeah, and that feeds into the concept of alternates. With just 5 planning board members, we've struggled sometimes to reach a quorum because we've had to reschedule meetings on a couple of occasions. Luckily, just a couple, I think, but it was due to a lack of a quorum, due to illness, family emergencies, vacations, work obligations, or conflict of interest. So I know that Zach and Brad and Martha, the Corp Counsel, they're looking into best practices in other jurisdictions for that. I don't know, Martha, if you're still with us, I think you are. If you want to speak to that, or Zach, if you want to speak to that as to where you're going to go with this. I know that they want to get the input from the mayor's office and from common council members as well.
Thank you. I don't have a whole lot to add yet, but I think, as you mentioned, Al, that the third bullet point, the conflict of interest form, will instruct some of the planning board alternates insofar as if there's an alternate when there is a conflict of interest situation, or if a member has to be absent for a meeting. But we are, I'm sort of following Zach's lead and Brad's lead in terms of developing legislation for this.
Yeah, and I think you're doing some exploring as to what other jurisdictions are, how they handle it, whether planning board alternates will be required to attend meetings or on Zoom, or whether they get a stipend for when they're in a meeting. All these kinds of questions that are right now we don't know. But I guess you're looking into other other jurisdictions.
Yes.
Just to piggyback from that, and just for some context for the board members. So the New York State Department of State has identified that municipalities for planning boards and zoning boards have the opportunity to allow for alternate board members in the instances of conflicts of interest. There have also been memos from the Department of State that have opined that alternates could be allowed in situations beyond a conflict of interest, say if someone is sick or if someone's not available because they're on vacation, or just not able to access Zoom, or they're not in the city at that point as well. It seems primarily that municipalities have gone for the latter, which is a little more expansive. And that would essentially require the Common Council superseding general city law to allow for that instance. As part of doing some of the background research for this, Patty Salkin, who used to teach at Albany Law School, but currently works for the New York State Department of State, wrote an article in 2003 about this. I can share that on Dropbox, and I will try and put a link in the chat as well for anyone who is still attending the meeting as well. But that essentially goes through some of, it's not New York specific, but it does go through some of the considerations that should be made when states or local municipalities should be developing an alternate policy in terms of, the level of engagement. At what point is an alternate brought in? Is it only if quorum can't be reached, or is it in any situation where a board member, a non-alternate board member is not present? So I think there's just some things as we proceed further. Al mentioned also just engagement of alternates. Are we allowing them to attend and ask questions even if they're not serving the function of a voting board member at a meeting? I think those are just some of the questions that we're trying to go through just to make sure that, if this is implemented and approved by the Common Council, that it's serving the best benefit to the planning board, and if the zoning board chooses to go that route as well, serving the best function for both of those boards moving forward.
Okay. And we also talked about city designated engineers getting involved with some of our larger projects. That would allow then the planning staff kind of to be freed up to work on the larger policy issues themselves and neighborhood plans, complete street developments, things like that. But
Makes a lot of
mainly
sense.
to get a city designated engineer to review plans and then make sure that what's being built is adhering to the plans, which is something that sometimes is an issue where plans don't come into reality.
And just for some additional context, thank you, Al. Just for some additional context on that, our department hired a consultant to do a review of our current procedures and practices. And from that, they developed a report. And one of those recommendations was to allow for the option of third-party review for these larger types of projects. In a lot of instances, this is known as a TDE for town designated engineer, but in our case, it would be a city designated engineer. That's essentially hiring a consultant to do the review. In a lot of other communities, what will happen is, an application will be reviewed for compliance for stormwater, for engineering, stuff like that, taking into consideration all the city standards, and they will kind of be that first point of contact for the applicant. And then from there, usually departments have an opportunity to review after that. This really helps because we have, city departments who are doing these reviews as, a secondary or even tertiary part of their job. And since it's low on their list, since they have a lot of things to do, sometimes that increases the time of a review based on their availability. So it would help on that end. I think it would also help in instances when there's an application, there's a lot of comments or questions about an engineering issue that CD could respond to those questions, better than our staff, just because, we're not professional engineers, and it's better to have a professional engineer answer an engineering question at a meeting and be able to respond to any questions that an applicant might have as well. And then, as Al mentioned, during the certificate of occupancy review by the building department, there has to be confirmation that the building was constructed, based on the site plan that was approved by the board. So there have been, as-built reviews, which essentially are site visits and reviews to confirm that, what was submitted matches what was built. And a lot of that has been done by Brad coordinating with other departments. But it would also help to have a city designated engineer to also help with this process, since they would be familiar with this process and they're able to do some of that coordination work, which frankly can take up a lot of staff time, not just planning staff, but other city department staff time as well. So that was something that was recommended in that memo. If there's anything else associated with that you have questions on or comments on, feel free to share those now or in a follow-up email.
Sure. So so this would apply to all projects, all applications, not just complex ones.
I think it would depend on I think that depends. I think in some instances, I think it would be helpful to have this be more used on a more regular basis. But I think, some of that just depends on the availability. One thought was to fund this through fees that are paid by the applicants themselves. So based on the number of hours that the project takes to review, that's what they are billed, to help alleviate some of the costs, to the city, but also help reduce the workload for the city at the end of the day. So if there's, an applicant who's maybe not responding or addressing all the comments that have been provided, and it takes more time, then it's, put upon them as a cost at the end of the day for not being able to address those issues. Some of that, there are some smaller projects that are reviewed through minor development plan review, and even with the planning board where they're smaller scale developers where they might not be as familiar with the process, where we do not want to penalize them for, maybe not being familiar with the process, or if it's something that, really doesn't need to involve much engineering or professional design work, not wanting to penalize them, but also trying to ensure that, everyone's time is being used for the best purposes and being able to accomplish as much as possible, within the given work week.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I think this is one of the most critical ones. I think we really need to get a city designated engineer on board pretty
Yeah,
as soon
I
as we
agree.
can. And then finally, performance bonds. I think this came up because we had, one project, as you know, Quackenbush Square, that just died. And, what do you do with a situation like that? And performance bonds or letter of credit could be one way to protect the city from projects that start and then don't go anywhere.
How exactly would that work?
And Zach, I don't want to speak for you. I think we're still kind of figuring that out. Recently, I drafted an MOU for a project that there wasn't a performance bond issued or a letter of credit, but it could be an instance where a performance bond could be issued, which in this case, the project, due to practical difficulties, the applicant wasn't able to install the required landscaping in order to get the final CO. And in this case, we entered an MOU that they could get a final CO with the understanding that they would install the required landscaping in the spring when they're able to do so. And so how a performance bond would work would be, rather than enter an MOU, the applicant would theoretically be able to put down an amount of money that they are going to meet whatever the required outstanding pieces that they need to meet. And this would be their assurance that they would do so. Zach, does that match?
Yeah, and
And I think, I'm sorry, Al.
no, I was just going to mention also that that a lot of times developers, when they're getting financing, banks will require either a performance bond or a letter of credit for the financing, for the very same reason that if the project dies and the bank has to foreclose on it, they've got something that can help satisfy the restoration of the site or getting another developer in.
Yeah, and on a similar note, you got the same thing like with quarries and stuff like that. The DEC, they require performance bonds to cover the expense of when the permits are expired to return the land to its natural, quote unquote, state. Yeah, same kind of thing.
Yeah, and there have been projects in the past that have used performance bonds more regularly. I think, Martha, you're trying to do a little more research on, letters of credit. But there have been other departments that have requested performance bonds. And that comes up a lot of, if projects aren't completed, if there's damage that's been done to the site, or if, partial structures have been built, returning the site, ensuring that there's money to return the site to the previous condition, or, if there was something immediately wrong with the site that needed to be addressed, that it's returning it to a condition where it's not presenting any potential dangers or risks if the project is not, if it's not completed at the end of the day. So, and I think with letters of credit, some of the interest of that is ascertaining the feasibility of a project. Sometimes based on the sequencing, we're a little bit segmented from the IDA review process, since they can't approve something until it's received planning board approval. So some of that, it's hard to gauge the feasibility, and whether there are instances, if something's not feasible, how much time is it really worth the board reviewing something if it's never going to be constructed. So those are some of the questions I think we're trying to figure out as we move forward, and potentially use some of these as options to make sure that developments, whether or not they go through, are improvements to the city.
Okay.
Okay. So on all of these are great issues, important issues. So we should stay tuned. And before we adjourn, I want to thank everybody for your patience, and also thank Common Council member Megan Keegan, a new Common Council member, and my Common Council member also, for staying at the whole meeting and listening to these comments as well. So Megan, thank you very much. I think you're still with us. So.
Okay, motion to end.
Second? Is there a second?
Second, I second. Absolutely.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye, aye, aye.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night, everyone.
Night.
Have a good
Have
night.
a late-
Night.